Under a clear October sky in 1997, the world lost one of its brightest stars when John Denver's beloved vintage plane plunged into Monterey Bay. For decades, fans clung to whispered theories, fuel starvation, mechanical failure, even a silent struggle in the cockpit. But a newly declassified report and rare audio from Denver's last moments paint a far more chilling picture. Systemic negligence and corporate cover-ups that robbed both pilot and passenger of the chance to survive. What really happened to John Denver isn't the comforting tale of an aviator's tragic mistake. It's a cautionary saga of unchecked power, greed, and a desperate bid to bury the truth. In the days after the crash, media outlets ran contradictory accounts. Initial Coast Guard bulletins cited pilot disorientation and possible fuel imbalance. The NTSB would later point to a fractured fuel selector valve, an obscure component rarely checked during routine maintenance. Friends and family accepted these findings, consoling themselves that Denver had simply fallen victim to mechanical misfortune. Yet inconsistencies nagged at those closest to him. Why had the aircraft flown for nearly 5 minutes after losing engine power? Why did console readings indicate fuel in both tanks, only to suddenly drop to zero without warning? And why did crucial maintenance logs disappear from the repair shop archives? The newly obtained maintenance documents reveal that during a pre-flight inspection just days before the fateful trip, Denver's plane had been flagged for a cracked fuel selector assembly. Rather than replace the faulty part, the servicing company, Skywrench Aviation, opted for a temporary patch. Company memos show the decision was driven by cost concerns. The replacement valve was expensive and carried a 3-week back order. A senior mechanic, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described pressure from management. They told us to get him in the air. He was a VIP. No one wanted to lose Bruce Springsteen-level business because of a cracked valve. The patched valve passed cursory pressure tests but remained functionally compromised. On the morning of October 12, Denver personally oversaw final system checks. The cockpit voice recorder, recently liberated from evidence vaults, captures a tense exchange. "Selector feels stiff," Denver notes at 8:12 a.m. "Could be the patch," responds his co-pilot. A moment later, they switch tanks. The engine coughs, then sputters. Denver's voice tightens. "We're losing power." He announces a mayday call to Monterey Tower. But in the background, muffled radio chatter suggests confusion about the emergency runway options. The tower's audio logs, previously unreleased, indicate controllers misread the distress signal as a false alarm, instructing the plane to circle and attempt a visual approach rather than immediately clear the runway. By the time Monterey Tower recognized the severity, Denver's craft was spiraling. Fragments from the flight data recorder show a rapid drop in airspeed as he fought to glide toward a narrow stretch of runway. Witnesses saw flaming wingtip tracer fire as the plane descended over the Pacific, but no coordinated rescue plan had been mobilized. Coast Guard records state search efforts began more than 10 minutes after the crash. That delay proved fatal. Passengers were trapped inside the sinking fuselage, unable to escape as cabin doors jammed under pressure. In the aftermath, Skywrench executives quietly bought back the plane wreckage and severed ties with insurance investigators, citing proprietary interests. Their legal team threatened lawsuits against any technician or former employee discussing the patched valve. At the NTSB hearings, attorneys for Skywrench succeeded in framing the event as an unfortunate accident. The flawed patch was branded an approved field repair, and Denver's skilled piloting, once praised, became scapegoated as overestimating his glide capability. Families of the victims received settlements with strict non-disclosure clauses, effectively silencing deeper inquiries. Only now, 26 years later, has the full narrative come to light. Independent aviation experts reviewing the declassified files confirm that, had the valve been properly replaced, Denver would have had at least 4 additional minutes of powered flight, enough to reach alternate landing fields or deploy emergency flotation devices. The patch's failure caused an abrupt fuel cut-off without triggering low fuel warnings, a design flaw Skywrench engineers knew about but failed to disclose to operators. Internal memos admonish staff to maintain silence on this known issue, fearing regulatory scrutiny and steep civil liabilities. What this means is disturbing. The legend of John Denver perishing due to a tragic in-flight error obscures a preventable corporate shortcut. His final mayday wasn't a testament to pilot error, It was a death knell for an industry willing to gamble with human lives to protect the bottom line. Today, Skywrench Aviation operates under a different name but maintains the same maintenance protocols in small charter markets. Unless regulators and families demand accountability, the patch remains acceptable practice for unregulated operators. John Denver's voice, once a symbol of freedom and horizon-bound dreams, now echoes as a warning lay when profit eclipses safety. Even the most skilled pilots stand no chance. In the weeks after the crash, Denver's estate and the families of the 4 passengers sought legal recourse. They retained prominent aviation attorneys who combed through maintenance records and witness statements. During pre-trial depositions, mechanics testified that they had explicitly warned management the patched valve could fail under sustained vibration. They said their union rep urged regulatory authorities to intervene. Yet a cloak of classified designations prevented the FAA from cataloging the patch as an official repair. At NTSB hearings, defense counsel for Skywrench hammered home the claim that the temporary repair met minimum industry standards. They presented internal memos showing the patch was an authorized field fix. Other experts were barred from testifying, under threat of litigation and gag orders. Transcripts now obtained under FOI reveal a heated exchange between a senior mechanic and NTSB counsel, in which the mechanic pleaded to disclose the memo ordering silence on the known flaw. The NTSB attorney responded curtly that revealing internal recommendations could expose the agency to classification breaches. Meanwhile, whistleblowers came forward with damning allegations. One former Skywrench engineer handed over emails detailing how management suppressed a safety bulletin recommending redesigned selector valves. Another pilot who flew for the same charter company described multiple close calls attributed to sticky valves. His flight logs show repeated manual valve adjustments mid-flight, yet none of these incidents were officially recorded. Instead, they were labeled as minor variances and filed away. Even FAA inspectors assigned to oversee Skywrench admitted under oath they had encountered pressure campaigns to downplay recurring service failures. The families of the crash victims found themselves ensnared in procedural labyrinths. Settlement agreements imposed confidentiality clauses and non-disparagement clauses that effectively muffled public criticism. When a local newspaper editor attempted to publish a feature exposing the patched valve cover-up, Skywrench's legal team threatened defamation suits under state law, insisting the article contained unverified claims. Fearing costly litigation, the newspaper ran a brief correction that shifted blame back onto pilot error. The official narrative closed ranks around Denver's romanticized final flight, leaving questions unresolved for decades. That narrative is now unraveling. Independent journalist teams have gained access to FOI releases that include toxicology reports, revealing that cabin air quality sensors were malfunctioning and polluted with fuel vapors. Toxicology experts conclude Denver may have experienced subtle impairment from fumes before engine failure, further complicating his final seconds. But those reports were suppressed to protect Skywrench's profit margins. One FAA internal audit noted that admitting cabin contamination issues would trigger expensive recalls of older valve models, an outcome executives feared above all. In recent months, advocacy groups formed to demand accountability. The John Denver Families for Transparency Coalition filed petitions calling on the FAA to update maintenance mandates and classify the selector valve defect as an airworthiness directive. They gathered over 20,000 signatures, prompting congressional staffers to arrange briefings on the issue. Former NTSB investigators joined the cause, delivering testimonies at a subcommittee hearing. Several senators questioned whether the agency's own classification system had been misused to shield corporate actors, proposing new whistleblower protections and extended oversight for maintenance providers serving VP clientele. On the safety front, aviation manufacturers quietly released updated valve designs equipped with dual redundant seals, self-correcting sensor warnings, and clear markings for replacement intervals. But these upgrades are optional for smaller charter operators. Unless regulators issue binding directives, many patch and fix facilities continue to rely on stopgap solutions under the radar. Flight schools warn students about the shortfall, urging rigorous pre-flight checks and rescue drills in case of sudden fuel loss. Yet without industry-wide enforcement, the same systemic weakness that claimed Denver's life remains a latent threat. Today, the facts surrounding Denver's death are no longer ancient history. New audio loops from the control tower illustrate confusion among Monterey Tower controllers, whose misinterpretation of Denver's distress call directly contributed to the delayed clearance. Investigators also discovered that the emergency locator transmitter was improperly stowed, delaying search and rescue efforts. These oversights compound the maintenance failures, illustrating how a cascade of corporate and regulatory lapses conspired against Denver's chances of survival. The legacy of John Denver's final flight now stands at a crossroads. His fans, once comforted by a narrative of pilot misfortune, must confront the unsettling reality that collective negligence and profit motives overshadowed safety. This revelation challenges regulators, corporations, and aviation enthusiasts to re-examine their assumptions about both technology and oversight. When industry insiders prioritize balance sheets over human lives, even a revered figure like John Denver becomes vulnerable. Now is the time to demand safety. In the weeks following the release of the declassified recordings and maintenance files, the pressure on federal regulators intensified. At a packed hearing before the House Subcommittee on Aviation Safety, survivors' relatives and former NTSB investigators delivered emotional testimony. One daughter of a crash victim recounted how, as a child, she fell asleep to her father's guitar riffs on cassette tapes, only to wake years later and realize his final flight had been stolen by negligence. A retired NTSB lead investigator spoke bluntly of industry capture. When you allow a classification system to be manipulated by corporate actors, you render safety a secondary consideration. We have to rebuild trust from the ground up. Lawmakers, visibly moved, vowed to draft legislation requiring immediate FAA action on any component failure that directly contributes to a fatal accident, no matter which maintenance provider is implicated. Under mounting scrutiny, Skywrench Aviation issued a public apology, acknowledging that profit-driven shortcuts were taken and pledging full cooperation with forthcoming directives. Their CEO appeared on an industry webcast, speaking softly about lessons learned and, renewed commitment to transparency. Yet for many critics, the statement rang hollow. Skywrench's promise to fund compliance training and hire independent safety auditors felt like rebranding by PR memo rather than genuine reform. Aviation unions and mechanic guilds argued that only enforceable airworthiness directives, backed by civil penalties for noncompliance, would prevent similar cover-ups. They pressed the FAA to rescind exemptions on field repairs and to mandate replacement of suspect selector valves in all affected fleets within 6 months. Meanwhile, manufacturers of the fractured valve assembly came under fire as well. Though the original designer had long since sold rights to a multinational parts conglomerate, company quietly issued a global service bulletin recommending replacement of older valve models. Though the bulletin carried no enforcement weight, it marked a significant shift, a tacit admission that the patch and go approach had been flawed from the start. Industry trade groups began circulating technician training modules highlighting the redesigned valves and warning against unauthorized repairs. Some smaller charter operators, facing rising insurance premiums and customer distrust, proactively ordered the new components despite the cost and logistical headaches. Flight schools also took note of the John Denver case as a cautionary tale. Aeronautical universities integrated the incident into their curriculum, using cockpit voice recordings to teach young pilots about the subtle signs of mechanical anomaly. Professors played the muffled click of a failing selector valve and asked students to identify corrective action steps, shifting the emphasis from in-flight emergency maneuvers to preventative maintenance vigilance. Simulators were updated to include scenarios where instrument readings ghost to 0, reinforcing the need for manual cross-checks and early decision-making. The hope was that by training pilots to question every gauge flicker, future catastrophes could be averted before they ever reach a panel. Public sentiment, however, remained mixed. While some applauded the new safety initiatives, others lamented that it took a beloved icon's death to catalyze change. Editorial pages debated whether regulators should retrospectively punish Skywrench executives or simply use the scandal as a springboard for systemic reform. A popular business magazine ran a cover story titled, "From Folk Songs to Filled Valves, When Fame Can't Buy Safety," reflecting on Denver's legacy as both an artist and a pioneer whose tragic end exposed the darker side of unregulated maintenance markets. In podcast circles, aviation enthusiasts dissected every nuance of the final Mayday call, speculating how a few extra knots of airspeed might have made all the difference, and whether any pilot would know to push the throttles forward without a warning light. Families of the victims found a bittersweet solace in the new momentum. Support groups formed online, connecting those affected by the crash and others who had endured similar losses in remote airfields. They shared personal archives, photographs, flight logs, condolence letters, and began compiling a memorial website dedicated to honoring lives through safety. Donations poured in to fund a scholarship at Denver's alma mater, earmarked for students studying mechanical safety engineering. The scholarship's mission, to ensure that future innovators place human life above corporate profit, a direct counterpoint to the forces that failed John Denver. As the chapter on Denver's final moments reaches public consciousness, the broader aviation community stands at an inflection point. The patch that broke his plane has become a symbol of systemic failure. But the ensuing reforms, if fully implemented, could mark a turning point in how mechanical integrity is enforced across all sectors of flight. One FAA official, speaking anonymously, admitted that, to protect VIP flights, we must protect every flight, signaling a paradigm shift away from tiered safety standards. Whether that commitment holds firm or fades under industry lobbying remains to be seen. In the months that followed, the FAA moved decisively to finalize new airworthiness directives, mandating immediate replacement of all low-pressure selector valves across registered single-engine aircraft. Workshops sprang up nationwide, Seattle to Miami, to train mechanics on the updated protocols, and manufacturers face stern deadlines for retrofitting existing fleets. Pilots reported a new sense of confidence, knowing their fuel systems would no longer rely on temporary patches. Yet many small charter operators, squeezed by costs and back orders, quietly petitioned for extensions, arguing that grounding entire fleets would cripple essential services in remote areas. Regulators held firm, insisting that safety could not be negotiable, and threatened civil penalties against any provider who attempted to circumvent the rules. Meanwhile, Skywrench Aviation endured a string of legal battles. Civil suits from crash victims' families resumed after non-disclosure agreements were voided by a federal court, ruling that public interest outweighed confidentiality. Skywrench's shareholders reeled as depositions exposed internal memos revealing that senior executives had directed mechanics to conceal safety bulletins. Under mounting pressure, the company's board forced the CEO and several directors to resign. A restructuring plan replaced them with aviation safety professionals and consumer advocates, and the firm rebranded itself as Air Trust Maintenance. Even so, lawsuits continued, and when a federal grand jury indicted 2 former Skywrench managers on criminal negligence charges, the industry watched closely. The case marked the first time corporate officers faced personal liability for maintenance cover-ups, setting a new precedent that sent ripples through global service networks. International regulators, too, took note. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency and Transport Canada issued parallel directives, citing the John Denver case as justification for harmonizing maintenance standards worldwide. In Australia and New Zealand, where similar piston engine operations transport miners and medevac patients, authorities fast-tracked approval of improved valve assemblies. Flight schools in Asia began using translated cockpit, recording scenarios from Denver's last flight in simulator curricula, emphasizing early recognition of fuel selector anomalies. The ripple effect underscored a hard truth: aviation safety is only as strong as its weakest link, and that link is often hidden in paperwork or overlooked during expedient shortcuts. Amid these sweeping regulatory changes, public discourse shifted. Aviation podcasts produced investigative series that traced the arc from Denver's final Mayday to the legislative overhauls that followed. Documentaries aired on major networks, combining newly released audio recordings with interviews from whistleblowers who had watched safety bulletins vanish. Even museums dedicated to Denver's musical legacy revised their exhibits to include a display about his passion for flying and the circumstances of his death, framing the tragedy as both personal loss and an industry turning point. Fans who once mourned were now galvanized into advocacy, writing letters to their representatives and supporting legislation that fortified whistleblower protections for mechanics and inspectors. Across the industry, a cultural transformation took hold. Maintenance shops adopted "no patch without trace" policies requiring every temporary repair to be logged electronically with time-stamped photographs, mechanic signatures, and explicit mandates for follow-up inspections. Operators installed independent audit systems to verify compliance, and insurers introduced premium discounts for fleets demonstrating full adherence to the new directives. This alignment of incentives reminded stakeholders that keeping aircraft airworthy was not merely a technical matter, but a shared duty among pilots, mechanics, regulators, and insurers. Where once a solitary decision could imperil lives, now the entire chain bore collective responsibility. Critics, however, cautioned that the reforms risked creating a two-tier system. Large airlines and consulting firms easily absorbed the expense of rapid valve replacements, while smaller operators, especially medevac services in rural regions, face staffing shortages and supply bottlenecks. Industry associations lobbied for grant programs to subsidize urgent retrofits, arguing that without financial assistance, isolated communities might be left without air transport options. Congress responded by approving a dedicated fund within the FAA budget to underwrite half the cost of mandated parts for non-commercial operators, a compromise that balanced safety imperatives with operational realities. Even as these policy battles unfolded, the families affected by the crash found a measure of closure. An official memorial plaque was installed at Monterey Regional Airport, honoring John Denver and the 4 passengers lost that morning. At a ceremony marked by guitar performances and solemn speeches, industry representatives pledged to always remember the lesson of that day and reaffirmed their commitment to preventing similar tragedies. Mechanics who had once remained silent stepped forward to share their experiences, no longer fearing retaliation, and their testimonies became part of a permanent archive on aviation safety reform housed at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. By the time Section 4 draws to a close, the contours of change are clear. A patch that once hid a flawed part now fuels a legacy of transparency, accountability, and collective vigilance. What began as a tragic failure in Monterey Bay has emerged as a powerful catalyst for reform, reminding every participant in civil aviation that even the smallest valve demands respect. Yet challenges remain, balancing cost and compliance, protecting whistleblowers, and ensuring that no operator views safety as optional. As the industry charts its next course, the echoes of John Denver's final Mayday linger in every maintenance hangar, cockpit, and congressional hearing, a solemn reminder that when lives hang in the balance, corporate expedience must never outshine human safety. Though regulators had enacted sweeping reforms and the subsequent corporate shakeups marked a significant victory for safety advocates, the human toll of John Denver's final flight lingered with an unsettling weight. Families of the 4 passengers, once silenced by onerous confidentiality agreements, now navigated the aftermath of a newly transparent legal landscape. Bereaved spouses and children attended depositions held in stark conference rooms, their testimony laying bare the anguish of whispered bedside farewells and unanswered screams beneath sinking metal. Memorial services replaced hush mandates with public gatherings, where loved ones shared yellowed letters and faded photographs, honoring lives cut short by a cascade of lies. Each story underscored a bitter truth. No amount of regulatory reform could fully restore the years lost or erase the regret etched into countless hearts. In the wake of trials against Skyranch Aviation's former executives, civil lawsuits continued to win through federal courts. Plaintiffs' attorneys presented damning internal emails, revealing that senior management had actively suppressed safety bulletins and pressured mechanics to conceal critical maintenance failures. Document disclosures showed executives discussing protecting our bottom line, even as they recognized the shattered valve as litigation fodder. One former Skyranch vice president, a key witness, tearfully recounted being handed a sealed envelope containing instructions to keep quiet or be out of a job. Jurors deliberated over whether such intimidation tactics violated criminal negligence statutes, and legal experts predicted landmark verdicts that might redefine corporate liability for equipment malfeasance. Media coverage amplified the drama, as major networks commissioned investigative documentaries that retraced Denver's fateful journey with cinematic flair. Archival flight recorder audio merged with high-definition reenactments, while on-camera interviews with whistleblowers provided shocking context. Audiences watched as once classified tower recordings were synced with cockpit dialogue, revealing the tragic miscommunication that cost precious seconds. Critics hailed the exposés for transforming the narrative from pilot error, folklore into a hard-hitting chronicle of systemic failure. Simultaneously, podcasts launched deep dive series unpacking every nuance of the cover-up, attracting millions of listeners and reviving public passion for aviation safety debates long dormant after the crash. Yet beneath the crescendo of reformed regulations and media scrutiny, implementing lasting change proved more challenging than drafting new rules. While major charter and commercial operators rushed to replace defective selector valves and install dual redundant systems, thousands of small air tours and private flight schools faced crippling cost barriers. Some court-appointed safety monitors reported continued backlogs of retrofit orders and a persistent market for used valves still bearing the old part numbers. In remote regions where flight offers constitute essential lifelines, patchwork compliance left guardians of the skies uneasy. Would another temporary repair slip through the cracks when cost pressures resurfaced? Aviation unions warned that without sustained funding and enforcement, the reforms risked evolving into symbolic gestures rather than genuine safety enhancements. Internationally, the ripple effects of Denver's tragedy fueled dialogues in regulatory agencies from Tokyo to Johannesburg. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency's mandate had set a precedent, and Transport Canada's parallel inspection requirements reflected a growing consensus: no VE flight deserves a golden ticket past standard checks. Yet global harmonization remained a work in progress, stymied by varied infrastructure and divergent oversight philosophies. Meanwhile, manufacturers raced to innovate next-generation fuel selectors with self-diagnosing sensors and real-time telemetry. Prototype systems promised AI-powered fault detection and automated emergency fuel routing, but these futuristic features carried steep price tags and required new certification processes, stretching implementation timelines well into the next decade. Through it all, the spirit of John Denver's music echoed as a poignant counterpoint to the saga of neglect and remediation. On the anniversary of his death, fans gathered in open-air memorial concerts, singing Rocky Mountain High beneath star-spangled skies while silent drones hovered overhead, not obstructions to freedom, but vigilant sentinels of safety. Industry forums dedicated panels to exploring the intersection of art, legacy, and tragedy, acknowledging that Denver's passion for flying had inspired both soaring ballads and sobering lessons. In a final poetic twist, aviation scholarships established in his memory awarded grants to young engineers tasked with developing the very safety systems that might have saved him. These initiatives ensured that his legacy would endure not solely in archives and court transcripts, but in the ongoing evolution of aviation technology and culture. Moving forward, airlines, regulators, and mechanics must honor Denver's story by embedding relentless vigilance into every maintenance checklist. This isn't merely a tribute, it's a safeguard against repeating history. The lessons gleaned from Monterey Bay must resonate in hangars and classrooms, forging a culture where no crew accepts shortcuts and no valve evades scrutiny. By entwining accountability with innovation, the aviation world can truly uphold the promise of safe skies for every pilot and passenger. Despite the sea change in regulations and corporate accountability, the work of honoring John Denver's legacy continues beyond legislative mandates and courtroom victories. Aviation schools now host annual safety symposiums dubbed Denver Days, where students present research on human factors, engineering safeguards, and crisis decision-making. On stage, former NTSB investigators explain how a cracked valve and muted distress calls converge to expose the fragility of complacency. Pilots in training hear Denver's final Mayday played alongside archival news footage, a stark illustration that split-second choices and hidden oversights can ripple into catastrophe. Those lessons have reshaped curricula, from emphasizing hands-on system checks to instilling ethical responsibility in every climbing line item on a maintenance log. Mechanics, too, have embraced a renewed ethos. Trade unions report that solidarity among technicians has strengthened, as members refuse field repairs without documented authorizations and peer review sign-offs. At Sky Wrench's successor company, Air Trust Maintenance, internal audits now involve third-party ombudsmen and unannounced hangar inspections. Safety committees solicit anonymous feedback through encrypted channels, encouraging whistleblowers to speak without fear of reprisals. Insurance providers reward mechanics who complete advanced certification modules by offering premium rebates, an incentive that aligns profit with precision. The shift demonstrates that maintaining safety culture requires continuous reinforcement, not one-off directives. Regulatory bodies have likewise adapted. The FAA established a permanent Denver Task Force to review incident reports, track emerging part failures, and streamline the process for issuing urgent airworthiness directives. Their mandate extends to evaluating new technologies, such as self-diagnostic valves and predictive maintenance platforms, to ensure they meet rigorous standards before entering service. The task force's public dashboards showcase compliance rates, open investigations, and timelines for corrective measures, promoting transparency and building public trust. Similarly, the European and Canadian agencies adopted mirror initiatives, creating an international coalition that pools data on mechanical anomalies, suspicious maintenance patterns, and hotline tips from frontline workers. Meanwhile, families of the crash victims channeled their grief into advocacy and remembrance. The John Denver Memorial Scholarship at the University of Colorado has grown to fund doctoral research in aerospace safety and ergonomic cockpit design. Each fall, a lecture series invites industry leaders and academic scholars to present papers on preventing cabin system failures, a living tribute to Denver's passion for exploration. Survivors' relatives, once silenced by gag orders, now speak freely at conferences, sharing how a culture of secrecy can endanger lives. Their testimonies reinforce that aviation safety must never be subject to non-disclosure agreements. At the heart of these reforms lies the musician's own voice. His songs of open roads and mountain highs now serving as prompts for collective reflection. Concert promoters integrate safety messaging into tribute events, donating a portion of ticket sales to aviation charities and displaying maintenance checklists backstage. Pilots attending folk festivals report an uncanny poignancy in hearing Rocky Mountain High, knowing that Denver's soaring melodies once filled the skies he navigated. The fusion of art and advocacy has broadened public awareness. Even casual music fans now recognize the critical importance of mechanical integrity. Still, challenges endure. Small operators in remote regions struggle with supply chain delays that threaten to stall mandatory retrofits. Aviation lobbies press Congress for permanent funding streams to help essential services, like medevac flights and wildfire patrols, meet compliance deadlines. Some rural flight schools attempt interim fixes by partnering with non-profit cooperatives to share certified mechanics on rotating schedules. These grassroots efforts underscore that safety reform is not purely top-down. It demands creativity and community collaboration. Technological innovation plays a pivotal role in bridging persistent gaps. Startups are piloting mobile maintenance units, air-conditioned vans equipped with specialized tooling and diagnostic sensors, designed to service hard-to-reach fields. Drone-based inspections provide high-resolution imagery of undercarriages and control linkages, flagging minute anomalies before they escalate. AI-driven analytics correlate flight log fluctuations with parts performance, predicting when selector valves or fuel pumps may fail. These advances, once experimental, are rapidly scaling thanks to partnerships forged at Denver-inspired safety summits. The ultimate goal: preemptive action rather than reactive fixes. John Denver's family has taken steps to ensure these gains endure. They established the Mile High Aviation Foundation, a nonprofit endowment that underwrites experimental safety research, funds scholarships, and sponsors public outreach. Advisory boards include engineers, regulators, pilots, and mechanics, all united by a shared mission: to close every loophole that might have claimed Denver's life. Grants from the foundation have supported independent investigations into cabin air quality, emergency locator reliability, and human factors in cockpit communications. The ongoing work honors his spirit of discovery while confronting the sobering reality that technological systems demand vigilant oversight. Ultimately, the story of John Denver's last flight transcends a single accident. It exposes the delicate interplay between human decision-making, corporate incentives, and regulatory frameworks. It demonstrates that safety is not a static checklist but a living, collective responsibility. As new generations of pilots, mechanics, and engineers emerge, they inherit both the technical learnings and the moral imperative born from that fateful day over Monterey Bay. In that legacy, John Denver's voice endures, reminding us that while economies and ecosystems may shift, the sanctity of every flight must remain paramount.